The most dangerous version of you isn't loud. It isn't angry. It doesn't explode. It's the day you go quiet and mean it. Not the silent treatment, not passive aggression, real silence. The kind that comes from clarity. When you reach the Sophia stage, something inside you locks into place. You stop reacting on impulse. You stop defending your heart to people who already decided who you are. You stop performing softness for approval. And that shift, it changes the entire energy around you. Your whole life, your empathy was mistaken for fragility. People assumed that because you understood them, you would tolerate them. Because you forgave, you would forget. Because you stayed, you would always stay. You listened. You absorbed. You carried emotional weight that was never yours. And deep down, you told yourself that this was strength, that endurance was love, that patience would eventually be rewarded. Here's the brutal truth. It wasn't strength. It was survival. You learned early that being attuned kept you safe. Reading the room protected you. Anticipating moods prevented explosions. You became hyper-aware because you had to. And that hyper-awareness turned into empathy so sharp it could read people within seconds. But without boundaries, that gift drained you. Sophia is the stage where awareness stops serving fear and starts serving wisdom. You begin to notice patterns instantly, not just in others, in yourself. You see how you over-explained to avoid rejection, how you overgave to earn stability, how you stayed too long because walking away felt like failure. And one day, something shifts. You get tired. Not the dramatic kind of tired, the irreversible kind. The kind where your nervous system refuses to participate in chaos anymore. The kind where your body physically resists, arguing, convincing, pleading. You don't explode. You detach. That's when people feel it. Your responses get shorter, your energy pulls back. You stop offering emotional access automatically. You observe more than you speak. You measure before you invest. And suddenly, the same empathy that once made you predictable makes you unreadable. You're not cold, you're conscious. You're not bitter, you're disciplined. You no longer rush to repair every crack in every relationship. You let silence stretch. You let people reveal themselves fully. You let discomfort sit without trying to rescue it. And here's the part that unsettles people the most. You stop needing them to understand you. You understand yourself. That is the Sophia stage. Wisdom over wound, clarity over chaos, restraint over reaction. You don't raise your voice. You don't threaten to leave. You don't deliver emotional speeches anymore. You simply shift your access. And when an empath shifts access quietly, the entire dynamic changes. Because you are no longer operating from fear of loss. You are operating from self-respect. That's when your silence stops being emptiness and starts becoming power. You were never too sensitive. You were too accessible. There's a difference. For years you believed the narrative, that you felt too much, that you reacted too deeply, that your emotional intensity was the problem, so you tried to shrink it. You tried to toughen up. You tried to act unbothered. But here's the truth that stings. Your sensitivity was never the weakness. Your lack of boundaries was. You gave unlimited access to people who gave you minimum respect. You explained your pain to people committed to misunderstanding it. You offered empathy to people who studied it only to use it against you. And because you could see the good in them, you ignored the patterns. That's the harsh realization of the Sophia stage. You weren't blind. You were hopeful. You saw the red flags. You just kept repainting them green. You told yourself they were going through something. You told yourself if you communicated better, they would finally understand. No, some people understood perfectly. They just benefited from your tolerance. Read that again. They didn't stay because they valued you. They stayed because you absorbed the damage. And that realization hits like a punch to the chest. You start replaying moments. The times you apologized just to keep peace. The times you doubted your intuition because someone called you dramatic. The times you betrayed your own needs to avoid conflict. Here's another uncomfortable truth. You trained people how to treat you. Every time you over-explained a boundary instead of enforcing it. Every time you accepted half effort and called it progress. Every time you stayed silent when something felt off. You weren't weak. You were afraid of being alone. Sophia strips that fear away, not because you stop caring, but because you finally understand something powerful. Loneliness is lighter than disrespect. You begin to see that your empathy was never meant to be currency. It was never meant to prove your worth. And once that clicks, something inside you hardens, not into cruelty, but into clarity. You stop arguing with people about your value. You stop giving third chances, disguised as understanding. You realize that being compassionate doesn't require being compliant. And this is where it gets uncomfortable for others. Because when you no longer overextend, people call you distant. When you no longer overgive, people call you selfish. When you no longer tolerate disrespect, people call you cold. Let them. The Sophia Stage forces you to accept another brutal fact. Anyone who only liked you when you were easy to access will resent you when you become selective. That resentment is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is alignment. With your intuition, with your limits, with your self-respect. You were never too sensitive. You were powerful without structure. Now you have both. And that combination, it changes everything. Here's the truth that changes everything. Your kindness was never supposed to be unlimited. Somewhere along the way, you started believing that being a good person meant endless access, endless patience, endless understanding. You thought depth meant endurance. You thought love meant tolerance. It doesn't. Kindness without boundaries isn't virtue. It's self-abandonment. You gave people the benefit of the doubt long after the doubt was gone. You kept offering grace where there was no accountability. You kept handing out emotional labor like it was your job to regulate everyone else's chaos. And here's the uncomfortable realization. Not everyone was confused about your value. Some people were fully aware and priced you low anyway. Because you allowed it. You answered every call. You explained every boundary. You forgave every violation. And over time, your depth became familiar. Your patience became expected. Your forgiveness became predictable. Predictability kills respect. Sophia is the stage where that pattern ends. You finally see that access to you is earned, not assumed. That emotional intimacy is a privilege, not a default setting. That your energy is sacred, and sacred things are not handed out casually. Another shocking truth. Some people don't miss your presence. They miss your availability. They don't miss your love. They miss your compliance. The moment you stop overfunctioning, the dynamic exposes itself. When you stop initiating, when you stop smoothing tension, when you stop carrying the emotional weight, silence fills the space, and instead of rushing to fix it, you watch. That's new. You used to panic at distance. You used to chase clarity. You used to feel responsible for every shift in energy. Now, you let it unfold. Because you finally understand something powerful. If a connection collapses the moment you stop overgiving, it was never balanced to begin with. Sophia sharpens your discernment. You no longer confuse trauma bonds with soul connections. You no longer mistake intensity for intimacy. You no longer romanticize inconsistency. You measure patterns. You observe effort. You listen to actions louder than words. And when behavior doesn't align, you don't argue. You withdraw. Silently. That silence is not punishment. It's protection. You're no longer trying to be chosen. You're evaluating who deserves to stay. You're no longer proving loyalty. You're assessing reciprocity. And that shift makes you dangerous in the most disciplined way. Because now, your kindness has standards. Your empathy has limits. Your forgiveness has conditions. You still feel deeply. That hasn't changed. What's changed is this. You refuse to bleed for people who wouldn't bruise for you. That's not cruelty. That's clarity. And once you taste that level of self-respect, you'll never go back to being emotionally discounted again. This is where the real transformation happens. You stop reacting, not because you don't feel, but because you finally control what you do with what you feel. Before Sophia, your nervous system ran the show. A tone change could ruin your day. A delayed reply could trigger overthinking. A slight shift in energy could send you into analysis mode for hours. You called it intuition. Sometimes it was unhealed hypervigilance. That's the hard truth. You weren't always responding to what was happening. You are responding to what once happened. Sophia separates trauma from truth. You begin to pause, to question your first emotional surge, to ask yourself, is this present reality or is this old fear speaking? That pause changes everything. You no longer chase reassurance. You no longer demand clarity from people who thrive on confusion. You no longer react just to relieve anxiety. You observe. You let people talk longer. You let silence stretch. You let inconsistencies reveal themselves without interrupting them. And here's what shocks you. When you stop interrupting patterns, they expose themselves faster. You used to confront immediately. Now you collect data. You used to argue your perception. Now you verify it. Quietly, you become strategic. That doesn't mean manipulative. It means measured. Another brutal realization. Not every emotion deserves expression. Read that carefully. You were taught that suppressing feelings is unhealthy. And yes, repression is dangerous. But impulsive expression is not maturity either. Sophia teaches restraint. You don't explode to release pressure. You don't confess every hurt to people who haven't earned that vulnerability. You process first. You regulate first. You decide if a response is even necessary. And sometimes, the most powerful response is none at all. That's the level most people never reach, because reacting feels powerful. But self-control is power. You stop trying to win arguments. You stop trying to correct every misunderstanding. You stop trying to control outcomes. Instead, you control yourself, your tone, your access, your investment. You realize you are not responsible for managing other adults' emotions. You are not obligated to fix tension you didn't create. You are not required to prove your intentions to people committed to misreading them. And here's the shift that changes your entire life. You stop asking, how do I keep this connection? And you start asking, does this connection deserve me? That single question filters everything. Sophia is not about becoming cold. It's about becoming calibrated. You still care, but you no longer care at your own expense. You feel deeply, you think clearly, and you move intentionally. That's when your presence changes, because you are no longer driven by emotional urgency. You are guided by conscious choice, and conscious choice makes you untouchable. Now this is where excuses end. You've awakened. You've seen the patterns. You've felt the shift. But awareness without action is just another comfort zone. Sophia is not a mindset you talk about. It's a standard you live by. So here's the challenge. Stop announcing your growth. You don't need to post it. You don't need to warn people. You don't need to explain your evolution. Move differently in silence. Respond slower. Say less. Mean more. You used to react instantly. Now you pause. You used to give access freely. Now you evaluate. You used to fight to be understood. Now you understand yourself. And that's enough. Here's a harsh truth you need to accept. If you keep repeating the same dynamics, it's no longer manipulation. It's permission. You cannot blame people for crossing lines you refuse to enforce. Sophia demands discipline, not motivation, not inspiration. Discipline in who you text back. Discipline in what behavior you tolerate. Discipline in how long you stay where you're not valued. And another uncomfortable realization. Growth will cost you people. Not because you became arrogant, but because you became unavailable for dysfunction. Some will call you distant. Some will call you cold. Some will say you've changed. You have. That's the point. You are no longer impressed by words. You are no longer seduced by potential. You are no longer loyal to history over alignment. You choose peace over intensity, consistency over history, respect over attachment. And here's the small shift that creates massive power. Before you give energy, ask yourself, is this reciprocal? Before you explain yourself, ask, am I respected here? If the answer is no, your silence is the response. No speeches, no drama, no revenge. Just withdrawal of access. That is power. You spent years mastering empathy for others. Now master boundaries for yourself. You spent years proving loyalty. Now prove self-respect. Sophia is not about becoming dangerous to others. It's about becoming unavailable for disrespect. So here's the final truth. If you want a different life, you must tolerate being misunderstood while you build it. Let them question you. Let them mislabel you. Let them feel your distance. Your job is not to be liked. Your job is to be aligned. And if your silence shakes the room, good. That means you finally stop betraying yourself.